Back on the Chad Hasty Show, broadcasting from the Culligan Water Studios. Better water, pure and simple. Guestapalooza continues here on the Chad Hasty Show, and in studio with me right now, State Representative Dustin Burrows. Welcome back.
Chad, thank you for having me. Very excited to be here and part of a pretty good lineup today.
Yeah, we've had a great lineup of guests today, and you're following the lieutenant governor who gave his opinion, and he's never shy about giving his opinion on how things are going in the legislature.
He told you how he felt.
He told me how he felt. Let me ask you, how did you feel about the special session?
Look, I look at it as successes and failures based on legislation we passed and didn't pass. I try to keep it very much policy oriented. When it comes to public education, we passed some priorities, whether it was, phasing out the small school penalty, some extra money for hardship grants for ASETAR, taking care of retired teachers, or having a study to deal with school finance in together. Those were the strengths, and very proud that we passed those and glad we went back for a special session to at least get that accomplished. That being said, I was in the camp that thought every one of the governor's agenda pieces deserved a vote. I thought property tax reform not passing was the biggest failure of the special session, and very disappointed that it did not pass.
What happened with that? Because it seemed as though even at the end of the regular session, y'all were close. The House and the Senate was close, and in this session, you would think, okay, the bathroom bill or the Privacy Act, whatever you wanted to call it, that probably was not going to happen. Some of these other issues where you weren't going to get 20 for 20, but property tax reform, it seems like every Republican should get on the same page on that, right?
Absolutely. The bill should have passed at a 5 or 4% rollback rate with an opt-in for the smaller counties under the $20 or $25 million exemption. There was an amendment that I supported different than the Buckingham Amendment, although I would have supported the Buckingham Amendment, which had elections for getting out of the exemption. There is no reason we should not have passed that bill.
So what happened? What?
Look, there's a lot of people who are going to go back and point fingers at one another and try to figure out there's enough people doing that. I am trying to make an honest assessment of making sure that doesn't happen again, and we should have passed that bill, and whether it's in a second special session or the next regular, I think we're going to pass it next time.
I've had both the governor and the lieutenant governor on, and they've said they want lawmakers to go home, hear from the people. Obviously, you're back home. Are you going to? What does that mean for you? Hearing from people. What does that mean for you?
So, today we're going to be in Brownfield. Tomorrow we're going to be in Snyder. I'm going to continue to go throughout the community and talk to people and ask them to grade our paper on the regular session, where I think CPS reform was a big success, including parental rights, to the special session where we took care of, education, and admittedly some of the property tax issues was not a success. It was, a failure, to, for lack of a better word. And so I'm going to listen to people, listen to their concerns. I know the governor is as well, and it's going to be up to the governor whether he wants to send us back before January 2019 or wait until then. But my ear is going to be to the ground. I know the governor is going to have his ear to the ground across the entire state, and decisions are going to be made about when to try to address these issues and how.
For you, what does the future look like in the upcoming session? Let's say there's no special sessions called, another special session. You aren't going to be back in Austin under regular session until the next legislative session. When it comes to that, and when it comes to the speakership and looking at the speakership, what needs to happen there? What changes, if any, need to happen?
We've got to strengthen the Republican caucus, period, the end. There were some bills that I think should have made it to the floor that didn't make it to the floor, whether it was the elimination of the Planned Parenthood affiliate funding, or a stronger property tax reform issue, or even a statewide preemption of texting while driving. I think there was strong support for a lot of the governor's agenda items in the Republican caucus, and they didn't make it to the floor. I think we as a Republican caucus have to become unified. We have to strengthen our hand going into the 86th session so that bills like that make it to the floor in future sessions for an up or down vote. I think the citizens and taxpayers deserve to know where their legislators stand when push comes to shove. I co-authored a significant number of the governor's agenda items, not all of them. There were some bills I would have voted against, i.e. vouchers, if it came to the floor. But that being said, the vast majority of what he put on that call, I would have been in support of, and we deserve to vote on it.
So how does that change from what we saw in this session to the next when we talk about strengthening the conference?
Well, I think the very first thing is we, the Republican caucus, we had a great meeting the day after sine die. 83, I believe that's the head count. I wasn't actually counting members, including the speaker himself, came into a meeting, and we had a very open discussion for an hour and a half. We talked about process. We talked about the long history of the idea, and some in practice, of the caucus taking a vote prior to the first day of session, trying to get behind one candidate and supporting them as a unified caucus on the floor. I will tell you, it was a really good feeling that I think a lot of us were on the same page, that we needed to put a process in place and become more unified. There's been some bickering within the Republican caucus. There's some old battle wounds in there, but just talking about it was a very healthy thing. We have a caucus retreat in late September where this idea is going to be furthered, and I'm in support of it. I think if this is the idea of having a vote in caucus before getting to the floor makes us a stronger caucus, makes us become more unified, then it's a very good thing. And to me, leaving that caucus meeting right after sine die and going into this, that's the general feeling I have, is if we actually go through and put this procedure in place, whoever gets elected through that, we're going to have a stronger, more cohesive unit to make sure some of these bills get to the floor during the 86th.
Do you think, as of right now, the current speaker can make it through that?
You know, so far, he is the only person who's actually decided to run. I wouldn't rule him out by any stretch of the imagination. I think there's some successes we can point to that he's actually had. I think a lot of us are watching and waiting to make sure that, you know, he is making a second announcement that he's coming back, that we're not having another second special. So the ball is in his court right now, and a lot of us are watching. But regardless, I don't think anybody's speakership or any votes are ever guaranteed. And the process, regardless of who the candidates are, is more important perhaps than the people, because it's not about one person. It's not about Speaker Strauss or Speaker Craddock or Speaker anybody. It's about the leadership team. It's about having a strong Republican caucus to make sure our bills get to the floor, and then the person who can manage that.
When we come back, we'll continue our discussion with State Representative Dustin Burrows. We'll have one more segment here on the program, and we'll talk about more with the legislature and what the future may look like down in Austin. We'll be right back. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO, 95.1 FM, 790 AM KFYO. We're in studio with State Representative Dustin Burrows. Representative Burrows, you've either heard, the governor here on the show, the lieutenant governor today. They've expressed their disappointment with Speaker Joe Strauss, and they've expressed their disappointment not so much with the members of the House, but mainly leadership. And it's because they can set parameters where things won't get an up and down vote. And I think a lot of members like yourself have probably been upset that you don't get to vote on a lot of those issues. So how can things change moving forward? What needs to happen?
Yeah, it's kind of what we talked about in the previous segment. I want to be very clear that we had some very good things happen because of the House under current leadership, whether it was CPS reform or, taking care of our retired teachers, or even taking care of some of my small rural schools. We had some success, and it's not about any one speaker. It's about a leadership team, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to pass those things, which are meaningful reforms for this district. That being said, I came out of special session, having co-authored a lot of the governor's agenda items that didn't get a up or down vote, whether it was the elimination of funding for the Planned Parenthood affiliates, Drew Springer's bill, good rural Republican. I thought that bill deserved to have made it on the floor and to have a vote on it. There were some other bills like that should have made it to the floor. And so this is the part in time where we come back to the district. I'm going to be up and down, District 83, listening to all of my constituents, from my county judges to just, taxpayers, and finding out what they thought. Did they think special session was successful? Did they think that we failed? And if so, what went wrong? But what I do know, and what I'm very committed to, is trying to strengthen the Republican caucus. Regardless of who is the speaker in the 86th session, having a strong, unified body where we take some of, the inner party fighting and we put it aside and we decide that we're going to come together and unify. And even with disagreements, that we're going to act more cohesive, like the Democratic caucus in the House does. That's going to ensure that some of these bills that I quite frankly, I'm upset didn't make it to the floor because the caucus has a stronger vote. That's not the Democrat caucus or the Freedom Caucus, but the rank and file Republican members. I think a lot of us were disappointed some of these bills didn't make it to the floor, and we've got to come together and unify going into the 86th. And to me, right now, the best plan I have seen to do that is having a vote on who's going to be representing us as the speaker candidate.
Speaking just from what I look at, when I see what people are upset about, and even what the governor is upset about, Lieutenant Governor, is the speaker and his team leadership overall act as the gatekeeper. What's going to be heard, what's not going to be heard, and it's set up that way with different committees and everything else. So some things are set up that way. Not necessarily on Joe Strauss, but let's say in the future, under any speaker, should that be the role where if the Speaker of the House gets to basically, in effect, kill legislation if they view it too far right, too far left, they get to kill that piece of legislation?
That's a phenomenal question, and there's been a lot of really great members who have talked about the idea of decentralizing power away from the Speaker and leadership offices, and pointed historically before the last, 3 speakers or 4 speakers, modernity, that's where it had been, very decentralized role, and it's more of a figurehead position. I've asked some of those people advocating for that to give me the specific rules that they believe would go along with that, such that really it is a figurehead position. And so I'm going to take a hard look at it. It's definitely worth, looking at. But let me make sure I do say this, and this is a little bit of counterbalance to maybe some of the messages out there. We've had the last 2 sessions very good conservative reforms that have gone through. And I never want to discount that. Whether it was from sanctuary cities or to passing conservative budgets, those have been under current leadership. We've had some successes, and we've certainly come out of special with some things I was disappointed in. And so now is the time to have some thoughtful reflection and talk to the people in the district, because this isn't a decision that representatives need to make in isolation. They need to talk to the citizens and find out what was important to them and get a good idea of, what went right, what went wrong, and, what processes could be reformed. And that's certainly the stage I'm in, and I think most thoughtful, reflective Republicans need to be in and listening to their constituents. And that's where we're headed.
We talked about property tax reform, and you and I both agree on that should have passed.
Period, the end.
That's something that just about every Republican voter wanted to see. The bathroom bill. Do you think it was as popular as the lieutenant governor and even the governor came on board? Do you think it was as popular among voters as it was with those two?
It should have been. Okay. I think in a lot of ways, the way that it came out and the way that the mainstream media portrayed it made it more comical and lampoonable than it probably should have been.
Yeah.
And let's talk about what bills. There was a lot of different things that got under the umbrella of the quote-unquote bathroom bill. The plan that I endorsed is the same one that the Governor Abbott endorsed, which was House Bill 2899 by Ron Simmons out of Carrollton, Texas. And it was a preemption bill. Pure and simple. What it said is if we're going to create new protected classes, the state is going to be the only one that does it. We're not going to have 1,200 different school districts keeping each of their own. And why was that so important to our school districts? We know heading into this next generation, there is going to be a lot of litigation about, who is and who is not a protected class, what rights people need to have to sue other people or not in our school districts. And I believe that the very near future holds potential of 1,200 different lawsuits against 1,200 school districts with perhaps not the resources to defend them against groups from outside the district. It would be a whole lot better off if we did what historically has always been done. The state determines who is and who is not a protected class, and if there's lawsuits challenging that by the ACLU or otherwise, us and our Attorney General are the ones who actually defend that, and we have that debate with one lawsuit, not 1,200 small ones.
You were recently given an award for education.
I was very proud of that.
Talk about that real quick.
Very proud of that. I'm unapologetically conservative, but being a conservative, I also know we have to take care of public education. That one of the biggest investments that we can make with resources is our future through PubEd. And whether it's supporting the continuation of ASATAR or eliminating the small school penalty, both of which we made some progress with HB 21, or just making sure that our schools do have the resources, not just throwing money at them, but actually the resources they need to raise our future is very important. And I was so honored to have been recognized by Lubbock Cooper of having been an advocate in this last session for public education. And I'm going to continue to be a conservative who's also pro-PubEd.
Well, and see, that is what you got an award from a school district. And what you consistently hear from Democrats is Republicans hate education. Republicans want to kill education. They want to hurt small school districts. It's not true.
No, it's not. And I understand those are the talking points, and every Democrat is going to try to run on that narrative. If you really actually talk to those of us who are in the trenches and you look at our voting records and you look at how much we actually call our superintendents and our teachers, and we find out what matters most to them, it tells a completely other story. Now, that's not what some of the statewide mainstream media wants to portray. I mean, obviously, they want to say if you're a conservative, you have to hate public ed. That ain't true. I mean, period, the end. It's just not. I can tell you everybody in the Lubbock delegation cares a lot about public education. I think all of our voting records tell a very different story.
Well, and that's something that in the near future I want to have you back on to talk about education, because on the last day it was interesting in the Senate, I believe, you had this the issue of sunsetting school districts come up. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about that one if it ever comes, if that comes back up in the future.
Well, that's really easy for some of the urban representatives to say, but out in my rural areas where that is the lifeblood of the community, there is some offensiveness to them coming up with those ideas.
Well, we'd probably be left with 10 school districts in West Texas just about if they did that.
But here's the headline. I tell you this much: conservatives can also be pro-public education, despite what the narrative coming out of Austin and the mainstream media is. Conservatives can be also pro-pub ed, and a lot of us are.
Representative Dustin Burrows, thank you very much for stopping by.
Thanks, Chad.